sharing experiences, really important, learning from each other, hearing from our expert speakers.
I want everyone to really take control of their health, because it's your body and your life, and if you're not in control of it, no one else will be.
Turns out that almost all pacemakers are completely fine to go through an MRI scanner.
Both septal ablation and surgical treatment show good results. It's safe, comparable.
HRT for many women is a lifesaver.
However, and it was a real shock, they told me I did need a transplant.
It's funny being a carer. You know, sometimes people don't take their medicines properly and you get cross at them. Why are you not taking your medicines?
I would say the next big stage in the development of this story was our understanding that this is, in many people, a genetic condition. So it's a heritable and transmissible disease.
So some of the pros of genetic testing are that we can find a causative gene change in some people.
So what I'd like to do is to welcome you to this session. The support group has actually led one of these conference sessions, and looking around I can see we're quite a mixed group. I can see folk who might just be exploring what might be involved in transplant. I can definitely see folk who I know are on their way to transplant, and happily a number of friends who I know have already been transplanted. So, my name is Stephen Kirkham. I've been involved with the support group since we started it in 2020. And the main picture here was taken in early 2015 when I was very, very frail and waiting on the urgent transplant list in the Golden Jubilee Hospital on Clydebank near Glasgow. My heart at this stage was being supported by a balloon pump, and that followed an in-hospital cardiac arrest a few days before. And all of that was after 10 years of dilated cardiomyopathy. In the second picture, 4 years later, after receiving a Scottish lady's heart, you can see me doing what I love doing most of all, and that's out on the hills walking with my dog. So this is how we're going to use our time this morning. I'll just give you a chance to read through that. And our intention is to end with the Q&A panel and discussion time. Well, I think it's really important that we celebrate, as Professor Perry was telling us earlier, we celebrate the truly exciting times these are in cardiomyopathy, with the new drugs and new approaches and so much more. But in the charity, we know enough about cardiomyopathies to be realistic. And that's actually why realism is included amongst our 7 core values for the charity. Because realistically, not everyone is going to respond equally. Some of us will approach and then we'll reach maximum medication. We'll actually have all the devices. We'll have had all the available surgeries. And across all the cardiomyopathies, the end point has got common impacts. And they're shown on this next slide. So it was knowing that in 2021, when we put together the Cardiomyopathy UK change agenda, those things that the charity is arguing for, advocating for, that we included the early referral of such patients to a transplant centre for monitoring and then assessment for transplant. And very much that should be at the right time, and that listing for transplant should be at the right time. And that's where our special guest, Sister Jane Lockhart, comes in, because Jane's worked at the Golden Jubilee Hospital for an amazing 24 years in the transplant coordinator advanced heart failure area. And so she's here to talk to us to try to bring to life the assessment process and the listing stage for transplant. And whilst I change the slides over to Jane's slides, you should each have been given a sheet of paper which outlines the journey. And it's really around that journey that Jane is going to try to bring some of that to life for us. So if you just bear with me. Okay, so if I can introduce Jane Lockhart.
So thank you for asking me to speak today. And I'm going to give you a brief overview of what transplant assessment is and how we go about deciding what list people go on to. I know that other centres do it slightly differently from we do it, but the results and the outcomes are ultimately the same. So for transplant assessment, we bring people in for an inpatient assessment. They have a 5-day stay from Monday to Friday where they undergo a series of tests and evaluations. During that time, you can meet the different team members and we begin the education process. The outcome of that week is discussed at a multidisciplinary team meeting on a Friday morning. And then after that, members of the team go back to the patient and discuss what the next steps are going to be. Now, during that time, we spend a lot of time finding out more about you. Sometimes we just get one piece of paper from your referring cardiologist basically saying, this man's sick, please can you help him? So we have to find out a lot more about you. We do blood tests, checking your blood group, looking at your NT-proBNP and also your tissue typing. We want to clarify the diagnosis of heart failure, excluding respiratory causes. We want to review your drug therapy and explore alternative surgical options if you have an ischemic problem. And we also want to establish that there are no contraindications to transplant. Sorry, I'm a bit shaky here, but I made the mistake of having a full caffeinated coffee before I started. It doesn't agree with me. God, I've got the jitters. So the test we do to confirm your diagnosis is an NT-proBNP, which is a blood test that essentially shows us how much stress your heart's under. It's a very good test. If the level's high, that's bad. If the level's low, that's good. And we can also follow the trends over time to see if what we're doing is the right thing for you. And we also do a cardiopulmonary exercise test where we put you on a bike and ask you to cycle as fast as you can for as long as you can. And that may not be very fast and it may not be very, very long, but it gives us a lot of information. And we also do pulmonary function tests to make sure you have no restrictive lung disease like asthma or COPD. We do a cardiac MRI, a right heart catheterization, and then we look at reasons not to transplant you. We do Dopplers to see if there's any blockages to the blood supply to your head and your legs. We also do a bone scan to see if you've got osteoporosis or osteopenia. More blood tests, including tissue typing, and any other tests that we think we might have to do, for example, CT scans, etc., to clarify any issues that we might have. You also meet the team. You'll meet with our psychologist. As we all know, heart failure carries a significant psychological burden. The first meeting concentrates on your ability to cope with heart failure and transplantation. And we also do cognitive screening, psychological screening for potential harmful behaviours, any history of mental health, and we'll work with patients to help with any issues that have been uncovered during that consultation. You also see the dentist because you need good teeth to be transplanted because there's a close relationship between the teeth and the heart as far as infection is concerned. You'll meet with our physiotherapists, the dietitian. You'll meet with our cardiologist and a heart transplant surgeon. You'll also meet with an anaesthetist, and you'll also meet with what I think is the most important member of the team, and that's the transplant coordinator. What are the relative contraindications to transplantation? Well, a history of alcohol or drug abuse. Now, if you have recovered from that, that's not a barrier. Smoking or vaping, you have to be free of smoking or vapes for 6 months before routine listing. If you have a history of poor compliance, that doesn't bode well because, as many of you here will know, that the medication regime post-transplant is quite strict. And if you haven't been taking your tablets with heart failure, we have to ensure that something's changed so you follow your regime afterwards. Severe psychiatric illness can make non-compliance an issue as well. If you're obese, if you have a BMI greater than 35, and I'll talk a little bit about that in another slide. If you have diabetes where you have end organ dysfunction, that poses a risk for the operation and post-transplant. HIV, hepatitis B, and also your tissue typing if you have a high PRA, and again, I have another slide for that. Absolute exclusions would be if you have raised fixed pulmonary pressures or irreversible renal or hepatic dysfunction, if you have peripheral vascular disease that can't be corrected by surgery, if you've had a tumour within the last 5 years, and also if you have severe frailty. Now, why pulmonary pressures? This diagram shows blue and red. The blue is blood with no oxygen in it that comes into the heart. It's pumped into the lungs to pick up oxygen and then back into the left side of the heart where it's pumped around the rest of the body. Pulmonary hypertension is high blood pressure in the lungs. And with heart failure, we get what's called group 2 pulmonary hypertension. When we have left heart disease, the problem is with how the heart squeezes or relaxes. The left heart is unable to keep up with blood returning to the lungs, causing a backup of blood and increasing pressure. This means that the right heart has to pump blood into the lungs against an increasing pressure, and while a native heart can adapt for a period of time, it will eventually fail. And if the pressures can't be reversed, it would mean that transplantation is not possible. God, the germs are getting worse. So how do we deal with your raised pulmonary pressures? Well, the first line management is diuresis. If that doesn't work, we will start you on some inotropes to make the heart work a little harder, for example, milrinone. If that doesn't work, then we may introduce an intra-arterial balloon pump, short-term VAD, or ultimately onto ECMO. We would consider a long-term VAD if we can demonstrate that your pressures can come down a little bit, but not low enough to have a transplant. And really, raised pulmonary pressures are the most common reason we have for urgent listing. Why is tissue typing important? This is quite a big slide, but I'm trying to make it simple as I can. So, what we're looking at is we're looking at human leukocyte antigens, or HLA for short. No, I'll just splash it all over the place. Thank you very much. And HLA are the proteins that are found on the surface of most cells in our body. The immune system uses these to see which cells belong to the body and which don't. If it sees cells which don't belong, it makes antibodies to attack and kill these cells. And sometimes, if we've had previous exposure to foreign cells, for example, from pregnancy or a blood transfusion, and the immune system has previously made antibodies, we are then sensitized to these cells, and our immune system is primed to make antibodies against them. We can identify and measure these pre-transplant, and we convert them into a percentage or a PRA, and your PRA may be negative, or it may range between 1 and 100%. If it's 90%, you would make antibodies to 90% of potential donors, and you could also make specific antibodies against your donor itself. And these can cause problems post-transplant, and they can lead to heart failure over time. We do a virtual cross-match with each potential donor, and the higher your PRA, the more difficult it can be to find a donor match, and this can mean waiting longer for a transplant. Why is your BMI important? Well, basically, if your BMI, for any condition where you need surgery, if your BMI is over 35, it can lead to an increased waiting time, increased mortality, increased complications, and it is a potentially modifiable condition. There needs to be a commitment to weight loss, your dietitian input, caloric restriction, because increasing exercise is not possible in heart failure. Is there a role for semaglutide, or the so-called skinny pen? Well, the main issues are that it's not licensed for weight loss. It carries significant side effects. It can lead to serious long-term complications. And there's very limited, what we would call off-label availability. If you stop it, you will start to gain weight again. And also post-transplant, your appetite increases with steroids. So the MDT outcomes basically are not suitable, too ill at present, routine listing, urgent listing, or super urgent listing. If you're not suitable, we always try to prepare our patients for this possibility. It's never an easy decision. We have to make sure that our team's exhausted every avenue. We would seek specialist opinions into the complications. And we have to make sure that transplant won't do more harm than good. We also have to be mindful about organ utility. We have to make sure that patients' medical therapy is maximised, and if they're very symptomatic, we would refer them to the palliative care team. We would always refer them back for local follow-up with their referring cardiologist, And we have to be cautious because long-term VADs are only funded as a bridge to transplant. So if you're not suitable for transplant, you're not suitable for a VAD. If you're too well, we would continue to review you at our advanced heart failure clinic with a low threshold for repeat assessment if you deteriorate. We can discharge you back to local follow-up if you show a sustained improvement, and these would be mainly NYHE Class 2 patients. And as we all know, the timing of transplant is important because after a transplant, the clock starts ticking. We list people according to the NHS BT guidelines. So for non-urgent, you have to have 2 or more of the information I've shown here. And while you're on the routine list, you have a minimum of a 3-monthly review. You would have a right heart cath repeated between 6 months. We would encourage you to inform your team of any changes in their condition. We have a low threshold for reassessment. And there's no doubt about it, being on the routine list is a very difficult thing. You have all the symptoms of advanced heart failure, and we've got nothing left in the cupboard to try. So we have to make sure we support you the best we can while you're waiting, because the wait time can be several years. Urgent listing criteria is for patients who are too unwell to be on the routine waiting list. And you have to be an inpatient on some kind of advanced therapy, continuous inotrope support or mechanical support. And then finally, for the very sickest patients, there's a super urgent waiting list where you have to be, again, an inpatient in an intensive care setting with mechanical circulatory support. So how long do you wait? Well, it depends on what waiting list you're on, depends on your height and weight, your sex, and also your blood group. So if you are 180 centimetre, 90 kilogram, O positive male, you'll wait longer. In fact, I think you can wait up to 6 times longer than somebody with blood group A or blood group AB. And the reason for that is O, blood group O is a universal donor, and an O group heart can be used for any recipient. NHS BT have tried to redress the balance by prioritising O and Bs in the offering sequence, but there is no doubt that you will wait longer. It's replicated throughout all of the waiting lists. The super urgent list, you can wait days to weeks. On the urgent list, you can wait weeks to months. And on the routine list, you can wait months to years. Your status can change while you're on the waiting list. You can become too well for transplants. Your condition can deteriorate. Then you could be placed on the routine list. And if you have a further deterioration, then we go back to urgent listing, inpatient stay, inotropes, balloon pump, etc. You can be suspended from the list at times as well because of infection, renal function, or your pulmonary pressures, then reactivated. Further deterioration, then perhaps MCS and super urgent listing. So there's no doubt about it, it can be quite a journey for people. So why do we all do it? Well, the end results, we see somebody like Stephen here, who's 63. He was an urgent transplant recipient, and now he takes part in elite transplant cycling games. We have 2 cousins. There's actually a 3rd cousin just been transplanted, and we see them here as children, not really appreciating what life had in front of them. And then we see them here as adults, both healthy post-transplant. And this is our annual Christmas transplant lunch for our patients. We're very lucky that our hospital's attached to a hotel. It was a white elephant we inherited from a private venture. And on that day, we had 70 transplant recipients out of our almost 300 attending. And it's really a wonderful day to see everybody enjoying each other's company and enjoying life. Now, finally, I had a little video, but it doesn't seem to want to play. But these are two of our young recipients. Morgan was transplanted 5 years ago, and she's been a wonderful support to Katie, who was only transplanted in January of last year. And she's given Katie a lot of hope because Morgan's now studying architecture and living in London independently of her family. And Katie is just about to restart her education after being very unwell after her transplant. So that's really me for today. My final slide, I quite like this. If heart failure was to be given a Trustpilot review, I think it would get 1 star. I think we'd all say it was terrible and we wouldn't recommend it. So apologies for the shaky starts, but I'll hand you back to Stephen now.
I'd like to suggest that we hold over questions at this point and we do all the questions together at the end. So I've now got to switch back to my presentation, so if you just bear with me. Right, thank you. So here we go again. And yeah, okay. So picking up from what Jane was saying, by August 2022, I think our support group felt that we got a good deal of experience between us around the journey to transplant, and that we wanted to draw together some of our key learnings and lessons for others to benefit from. And I think actually secretly I rather hope that this might be the starting point for a rather more in-depth study. We've still to achieve that, but anyway. So we decided that we would begin by recording our feelings and our anxieties, those sort of anxieties that had erupted on that first mention of the word transplant by someone, and then other emotions which had sort of wheedled their way into our consciousness as we were making this extraordinary journey. And so here now are some of those voices, if the radio mics are on.
I'm in shock, crying.
Is this a death sentence?
I'm really not ready for this.
At last, doctors that listen and take action. I'm safe.
What are they not telling me?
Have I been listed too soon?
This is completely surreal.
How long will I be waiting? How can I possibly get on with living my life?
Someone has just pressed the pause button.
We're in limbo. My life is on hold.
I've completely lost any sense of control over my life.
I'm determined to keep living.
How am I supposed to keep fit? I'm so breathless, so weary.
I'm just putting on weight.
It's all right for them. I'm losing weight and getting more frail every day.
I know I'm declining. Why don't we hear anything from the transplant centre?
I'm scared, really frightened.
I feel guilty. Am I waiting for someone to die?
I've given up. I don't think it'll ever happen. I'm not even daydreaming about it anymore.
I'm determined. Live my best life.
Live for the moment.
My family and friends just don't understand.
I feel like I'm living a double life.
I hate this invisible disability.
They say you look so well. I feel fraud.
Someone asked me when my operation is. They really don't understand.
There's too much information.
I want to know everything.
I don't want to know what will happen. I'm living with uncertainty every day.
How can I get support for my family and my friends?
And what about the money? How on earth will my family cope?
There's nothing I can do. What will be, will be.
Oh, let's get this done. I want to move on.
Okay, well, I don't know whether any of those resonate with anyone in the room, but what might you generally take away from this? And I've tried to summarize what we think the sort of takeaway points are. I don't know how you feel about that, but primarily we are all different. Not only are we all different, but at different times of the day, we can feel completely different about these sort of things. So it's as well to be aware of that before you start. And you'll notice how many of those feelings were contradictory. So there is no right or wrong answer to this. There's no way that you must feel, you should feel. You are you. And don't forget that those you live with, those you love, those who care for you, will have their own feelings too. And they need to be considered in this and will need help. And finally, sharing our anxieties does just make such a difference. That has been a lesson we have all learnt. Now in this next section, what we're going to do is to try to describe to you some of the coping strategies that we've adopted. And so, as we prepare for this, if our four speakers would come and just take their seats at the front. Annette, if you'd like to come up front. Thank you. So, the four guys will introduce themselves and talk a little about some of the coping strategies that we within the group have used to get us through. So first, Annette.
Hello. I'm Annette from Devon. I'm 68 years old now. I was eventually diagnosed with DCM and advanced heart failure in December 2012 after struggling for 2 years to get the diagnosis help I needed. Even then, I was warned that a transplant was likely outcome. At the end of 2013, my medication was making no impact. I was at risk of cardiac arrest and had an ICD fitted. My EF dropped to between 12 and 15. I was referred to Royal Papworth Hospital for what would be 2 assessments. They watched and waited, and then in 2:15, the pressure in my lungs built up. I was more breathless and having to climb stairs on my hands and knees. This was the time to be listed. I signed my consent form, having to make decisions about things I'd never even thought of. Placed on the routine list on the 17th of June 2015, they said my wait would be 6 to 12 months. It turned out to be much shorter. 12 days later, on the 29th of June, I take my 2-year-old granddaughter to the seaside, using her pushchair to lean on. Back at home in Bristol, the phone rang at 9 p.m. and Papworth was saying they had a possible heart for me, and a car was waiting outside my house. I needed to be in Cambridge by midnight. I collected my bag and went off on a very fast Blues and Twos car journey with my very anxious daughter by my side. We arrived at 11:55, and amazingly, I felt calm and ready for what I was to face. My transplant wait had only been 2 days, although I already knew a lot about waiting, having experienced that traumatic 2-year wait for diagnosis and help. Here are my thoughts on waiting on the routine list. It seems so simple at the time to be put onto a list. It's a possible waiting game. What helped me, most importantly, was from when I went on my first assessment to Papworth. I found the staff were welcoming, warm, and completely professional. I felt I could put my trust in them. And so I was confident that in the end, things would come good. It helped my decision to be positive. I'd been given this opportunity, and I would make the most of it. I also knew that the transplant coordinators were there at the end of the phone if I had any questions. Support from my family and friends during this time was so important and will be equally important to anyone post-transplant. But don't assume everyone will see things as you do. And the reality is that family and friends may need extra help to understand just how ill you are and just how much you need this transplant. Access to sources of information for them is as important as it is for you. Sadly, I did experience some negative comments. A friend told me I was too old to go for transplant at 56. There are plenty of things that need doing whilst waiting. action need taking and documents identified to ensure that everything is in place. It's surprising how comforting it is to know that you have made things as straightforward as possible for your family, should everything not go to plan. A will is an obvious thing, but simple things like listing all your passwords and ensuring a trusted family member knows how to access them will help. And finally, there's jumping at the sound of a phone, even if it isn't yours. See if you could give your phone to a family member for a period of time. Or try using a different call tone for the transplant centre. Your bag is going to be the most important thing to you as you leave the house. Make sure it's packed the day that you're put on the transplant list. In the group, we now joke about having a simple thing that made such a difference. Get yourself a very long phone charger. Once in hospital, you never know how far your bedside will be from an available plug socket. Too many times of trying to read your phone like this. I was incredibly lucky to receive my gift on my first call. A selfless young man had opted to donate, and without him, his family, and the Papworth team, I wouldn't have the joy of seeing all my grandchildren reach senior school this year. Thank you. I'll now hand on to Darren.
Hello. Thank you very much. My name's Darren. I'm 54. I'm from Norwich, up the Canaries. My journey with dilated cardiomyopathy started just over 7 years ago when I started collapsing one morning. Fast forward to the end of 2022, and I was having my 2-day assessment at Papworth Hospital. First photo is me, looking rather silly because I was very confident they were going to tell me I don't need a transplant. I was wasting their time. I was being too dramatic. I should bugger off and go home and stop wasting their time. However, and it was a real shock, they told me I did need a transplant. I was placed on the routine list. That happened in April last year. I received my call in December just gone, and I was home in just 13 days after that operation. In exactly 3 weeks from today, it's going to be my first heart anniversary. Thank you. That probably sounds like it was really straightforward, and it was a dream. It wasn't, not for me. In reality, before my transplant, my wife Mandy was holding me up physically every time I passed out, got dizzy, the knees started to shake, but also mentally and emotionally. I tried to keep to a routine. Unfortunately, it was COVID. I was shielding. That routine really was walking from one room to the other and back. It wasn't helping. I was finding things really tough going. My mind was taking me to some dark places. I decided that I actually needed some help out of this. I reached out to my local hospital and I was referred to a clinical psychologist. Through them, I learnt that the brain, whilst it had developed with modern times, there was still this basic caveman survival instinct part to it. It was reminding me of the danger times, the fear, and it was stuck in that routine of just telling me everything was dangerous. I was going to go to some bad places. I couldn't stop these negative and disturbing voices from happening at all. They were taking over. The psychologist told me quite bluntly I was never going to stop these noises. They were too powerful to make them go away. But with training and practice and time, I could actually try and pay less attention to them, give them less focus, take away some of their power. We talked about some techniques and tools, and if you would indulge me, I'd like to tell you about one of those that I found really effective. It was to try and visualize these negative noises and voices were coming out of a radio in a room much like this, over in that corner just pumping out this crap. I called it radio doom and gloom. It was constantly telling me things were bad, I was going to die, you're in a bad place. I can't turn it off. I can't turn the volume down, it's stuck on that one station. But the power I do have is actually I can turn it so it's facing the wall. I can throw a quilt over it, dampen the noise. It's a cold end of the room, it's black and white. But over there, there's a group of people I know. If I turn my attention away from this noise, it's colourful over there, it's warm. They're having a party. There's some really good music playing. I like the 80s, it's the Smiths. Probably not the most cheery music, but it's my thing. I'm going to join them. I'm going to turn my back on that. It worked for me. It was a way of not paying that any attention. It's still there. If I want to choose and focus on that, I can hear it. But there's better things over in that direction. It helped me so much, I was eventually able to sign the papers to go on the transplant list, which I'd been avoiding up until then. I decided after the transplant to make the most of it, time to leave some of these voices behind. The second photo is 7 months past transplant. I get to lead out Team Royal Packworth at the British Transplant Games. Somehow I scrape a medal as well. Then 9 months post-transplant, I complete Run Norwich, a 10k road race, and get some little pennies for Packworth as well in doing so. It can't be stated enough, though, the impact this has on our families and our friends and our loved ones. I can't imagine having to watch my wife Mandy or one of my daughters, Charlotte or Frances, go through this. I just can't picture how difficult that must be. I was in a land of morphine. I didn't know what was going on. It was all dream state, gobbledygook, and all sorts of rubbish in my head. They had to watch it stone cold sober. We talked about the what ifs, and we put our wills together, got them straight. The difficult conversations you never want to have, but it helped me get everything sorted. I knew that bit was done if something did happen. But it didn't, and we plough on. But my main message, the bits our group have put together about coping strategies, there is help out there. Don't fear for asking for it. Emotional, mental support is a huge part of it. The physical side is just one element of that. Thank you for listening. Thank you. I'd like to pass you over to Steph to tell us about her story. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi everyone, I'm Steph. I'm 33 years old, a mother and a wife. My heart journey started at the birth of my daughter 6 years ago. I went from a healthy 27-year-old, happily expecting the birth of my first child, to a mother, but with a chronic illness. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. Countless blood samples, ECGs, echoes, MRI, all to determine that I have dilated cardiomyopathy. One genetic testing later, we knew that it was in fact a gene that caused my heart problem. And I was fitted with an ICD because I was in a great risk of sudden cardiac arrest. Unfortunately, my heart just couldn't cope, and I started declining in the summer of 2021. I went through the Transplant Assessment and was told that I do indeed need a new heart. My biggest fear was to be put on the urgent list, which would have meant to be in hospital, waiting for a heart, away from my daughter and my husband. I just couldn't believe I'm so poorly that I need a new heart. So I asked to have 6 weeks to think about it. In the end, I did sign the consent form at the beginning of March 2022. Just a week later, I called for an ambulance and I went into hospital where I spent 112 days. The first 2 weeks there were awful. It was the same time as my birthday and then my Mother's Day. I didn't know if my fear has come true and I had to stay in hospital and wait for a heart. The not knowing was killing me. But in the end, when I had the certainty that, yes, that's the case, I accepted it because I knew that I can trust my doctors and they're doing everything in my best interest. When I was in the hospital, it was very important to me not to become a patient. I was getting up every morning. I was having shower, straightening my hair, going out for walks, just doing normal things to keep me sane. Just sticking to non-hospital routine as much as possible. I was doing laps of the ward, anything to keep me going. I kept myself occupied in any way possible, catching up on reading, coloring, watching the whole Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard trial. Hospitals are a very lonely place, and especially the coronary care unit of the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. I don't know if anyone here has been there. It's a very dark place, there are no windows. But that's where I met my friend Jenna, who happened to wait for a heart transplant as well. We became very good friends, spending every day, all day together, listening to 90s music, talking about anything and everything, just laughing and killing time. Together, we even decided to learn to knit and raise money for Cardiomyopathy UK. My husband and daughter were visiting me on the weekends. The first photo is one of such weekends. At the time, she only knew that Mommy needs a new heart. We both wanted to know everything, but we wanted to protect her. Post-transplant, we talk openly with her about what happened, about my new heart. We have this book that we read together, Little Panda and Her Super Heart. It's a children's book. It's for kids who are going through transplant, but I found it very helpful for my little one as well to understand what I went through. I don't hide my scars from her. She's seen my scars. She knows that my donor is an angel that saved Mommy with their heart. I do know, though, that she worries every time I go into hospital for checkups, and if I happen to stay in hospital for various reasons sometimes. I'm amazed at how my husband managed these 4 months I was in hospital between caring for the little one and coming and visiting me, caring for me as well, bringing me things that I request. I asked him when I was writing this, and he said that he had to be strong for her, so she won't feel the difference that Mommy is not there. It helped him that he was fully occupied all the time. He didn't have the time, to actually sit down and think what's happening, because he had to drop her off to nursery, then pick her up, go to school, to work, cook, clean, come visit me on the weekend. So that really helped me. And also the support of family, the mental support of family, being able to openly talk about his emotions without hiding anything. Without wanting to sound like I'm preaching or talking in cliché, I really, really believe that keeping positive really helped me. I was scared to death at times, like in the second photo, where I have just been put on a BIVAT on the super urgent list. Third photo is a week later, a day before the call. But in the end, I made it, and I'm still here to celebrate my daughter's birthdays. All thanks to my donor and their family. Thank you. And I'll hand over now to Hugh.
As long as the slides stay as they should be, I'll be fine. Hello, I'm Hugh. I'm 70. That's a cue for you all to gasp and say, surely not. I live in York, and I'm a patient at the Freeman Hospital in Newcastle. Unlike the others here, I'm still waiting for my transplant, so my story is a little different. I was diagnosed with dilated cardiomyopathy in 1986, aged 32. Since then, an awful lot has happened, but in spite of all the best that could be done with drugs, implanted devices, shocks, ablations, various other procedures, my heart function has slowly declined. It's never got better, only gone downhill. Until in 2017, I was referred for the first time to the Freeman Hospital for my first transplant assessment. That turned out to be one of several over the next 4 years, but it was always not time yet. Not time for the serious chat, were the words used by the consultant. But in early 2021, I was put on the routine transplant list. And then a big step. I had a left ventricular assist device, or LVAD, or VAD, implanted that September, so just over 3 years ago. An LVAD is an implanted pump, and it's used as a bridge to transplant, as Jane was saying. It keeps me alive while I'm waiting. Basically, it takes over the job of the failing left ventricle. It's implanted in the chest, plumbed into the heart, and connected via a cable, which comes out beside my navel and connected to a controller and 2 rather large and heavy batteries. It was a big operation. I was in hospital for 6 weeks after open heart surgery, so a lot to recover from. And now living with an LVAD isn't always easy, but it is manageable. The photo on the left behind me shows all the equipment I rely on. If I go away for a night, it all has to come with me. The 2 batteries in the front and the controller in the front of the picture are actually connected to me, so I couldn't move very far from that table to take the photograph. I don't have to carry all that with me all the time, but I do have 5 kilograms of stuff that has to come with me everywhere. Half of it's connected to me, the other half at the moment is sitting in a rucksack over there, so if I collapse, would you just dash and get my rucksack, please? There are problems, little complications like every night. I have to plug myself into the mains, you get used to it. There are worries about things going wrong. The machinery can cause clots and therefore strokes. Infection can come in through the incision in my belly. I can get a bleed, or the machinery can simply malfunction. So I'm very closely monitored, of course, by the Freeman Hospital. And after 3 years, I remain on the routine transplant list. And I don't know if I'll ever get an offer. My blood group is against me, blood group O. My height is against me, and my age is against me. So maybe the LVAD is for life. Maybe this is it. That's a decision we haven't yet taken. That's for the future, but maybe not so far in the future. I don't know how I feel about that. I tell myself now, oh, it'll be fine. But I really don't know how I'm going to cope if and when that decision comes. I don't know how I'll cope with that. But I can say a bit about how I've coped so far, and I want to sound as positive as I can. Being told I needed a transplant was actually, it was a shock, of course, but in a funny way, at the same time, it was not a shock at all. Transplant had been first mentioned to me 30 years ago as where I was heading, so I knew that's what was going to happen eventually. So it was really strange. It was a very, very weird afternoon when I was told after the MDT meeting, we're now putting you on the list. But at the same time, unlike Darren, I had no hesitation in signing the consent forms. I just did it there and then, before I'd even told my wife. She wasn't with me that day. It had become a routine. I was just going, I was expected to come home that afternoon and see you again in 6 months. But it certainly really felt surreal. I felt like I was entering a looking-glass world, as I describe it now. The operation to implant the LVAD was a daunting prospect. I was very nervous, but I found a way of dealing with the stress. I told myself that all I had to do was be there. Nothing else, just turn up on the day. Everything else is being taken care of by other people. I found that a very helpful phrase, just be there. Whether it's any use to anyone else, I don't know, but I found it a really powerful thing. Another really important thing is and was other people. The friends I made on the ward, other LVAD patients I've met, and there have been quite a few of them, people alongside me here, the other presenters, Cardiomyopathy UK, of course. That means you lot. You're all people who in various ways share my journey and get it in a way that no one else can. Don't forget the power of laughter. All sorts of crazy things happen in hospitals. They're weird places. Ridiculous things go on. Stupid things, amazing things, funny things. And living with an LVAD itself brings its comic moments. you need to develop a sense of the absurd and laugh as much as you can. Another coping strategy, of course, is keeping active, and that applies, I think, before and after transplant, being as fit as you can. The photo on the right shows me with the Electric Cranks Cycling Club. They're a bunch of crazy people, most of them with LVADs. 7 of the people in that photograph have an LVAD, 1 has had a transplant. And not they, I'm a member, we use electric bikes, so we are e-humans on e-bikes, all powered by batteries. Finally, I really must stress the role played by the Freeman Hospital staff. The support and understanding, and the friendship, in fact, the friendship I have found there has been amazing. When you're first referred to a transplant centre, I'm sure I'm not alone in finding that a very difficult moment. It is weird. It is so far beyond what you expect to encounter in a lifetime that you don't know how to cope. But it's much better to be referred to the experts before you think you need it, before it's too late. And even though it seemed too early when I was first referred, I quickly realised, now I'm in the right hands. I'm being looked after by the people who understand and know. And that stays with me. Thank you.
Thank you to all my friends from the support group. I'm very conscious that time is marching on. I very quickly want to make a couple of points, a couple of final points, and then we'll take some questions. The first point is that our support group is always warmly welcoming new members. And if you are interested, the route into our group is to contact Christy Jones at the support group, at the support team in Cardiomyopathy UK. They're actually at a stand 9, I think it is, at the end of the room, at the end of the hall, and you can email Christy and his team at services@Cardiomyopathy UK. We couldn't finish without actually recording the vital importance of these folk, our donors, and not just our donor, but of the donors' families who've had the courage to agree to transplant going ahead. For those of us who've made this journey, for those of us who are still waiting, for those of us who might face this journey in the future, these are the real heroes in this. Our donors, their families, and our transplant teams, Jane, if I may say that too. So there are some of the charities' information sheets. There's an information sheet on frailty. There's a good information sheet on breathlessness, which may be something that people struggle with. Those are available at the back. If you were interested in looking at our paper, we can email you a copy of that. There's a sign-up sheet on the back. So if my friends and Jane would like to come to the front, we will endeavour to take your questions. Could you say to whom you think you would like to direct your question, or whether it's a more general question? We've got some microphones that will come round. If I leave that with you, Jane, so we can hand it to others.
Shall I hang on to it?
Could you hang on to it and pass it to whoever's got a question? We do have one question already, which has been handed to Stephanie, who is also a transplantee from Papworth. And I think this question is really one for Jane. Jane, why does your sex matter for transplant? And actually, as a recipient of a lady's heart, I've got a vested interest in your answer.
Well, you'll be pleased to know I've recovered from my tachycardia, caffeine-induced tachycardia. I do apologise. So it's essentially about size matching, and women are typically smaller than men. So if you are a woman, you could get a smaller man's heart or a female heart. If you're a tall man, it's likely that you'll have to wait for a male heart. And it's unusual for someone of Stephen's height to receive a female heart, but we work on the basis of a 20% height mismatch, and we know that you still have good function after that. If we give you a heart that's too small, it's like putting a mini engine in a Rolls Royce. It's just not going to get up that hill, and you're still going to be breathless, and you're still going to be tired. So that's why sex matters.
Okay, any other questions? Yes.
There's another question for Jane, if that's okay. I know it's a very, very emotive time when you discuss transplant with families, but if the person who is a potential donor carries a consent, is on the donor register, so they want to be a donor, but then the family don't consent to it. Do you think if that wasn't the case that you would get more organs donated because families wouldn't say no, they wouldn't be able to, if you went with the patient's wishes?
I think so. I think basically it becomes, I think, if in England the law is such that we would be well within our rights to take a heart from somebody whose family didn't agree. But that's never been done. First of all, it's a dreadful thing to do. And also the negative publicity for that could possibly dissuade other people from signing the register, because who would want their family to be doubly distressed? I think we just have to work on promoting organ donation, showing the fabulous results that it has. We've got people here in the room, and try to educate people. We hear comments like, I don't want them to suffer anymore, they've been through enough. And I think we have specialist nurses for organ donation who do an amazing job of helping families through that. And we are seeing increases in organ donation. We also have the opt-out system, where if you don't opt out of the donor register, then your organs can be used. But again, I struggle to see how that would convince a family who don't want to donate to go ahead. It's just educating the public. And I've often been an advocate of, when you sign your donor card, having your next of kin sign the donor card too. So at least you've had that conversation. But in 24 years, nobody's taken me up on that. So that's good. Hopefully at some time in the future, it's about encouraging potential or people who want to be on the register to have that conversation with their family about fulfilling their wishes after they pass.
Thanks, Jane. Could I just add as well that there's a glass ceiling between the organ donation teams, the nurses who work that team, and the transplant coordinators, so that there's no question of private arrangements or anything unethical like that. And certainly some of the, I was involved in the new legislation up in Scotland, and there is a questionnaire that the organ donation nurses have to complete with the families, which actually is quite important. It asks questions like, has the deceased travelled to foreign countries where there are rare diseases? They ask questions about drug or sexual issues. Because those might then have an impact. So there is additional information required of the families, as well as everything that Jane has said. Are there any other questions? Yes, please. Stephanie?
Thank you. I just wondered if you'd all been in contact, well, obviously you had a transplant, been in contact with your recipient or the family, well, obviously not the person who donated, the family, sorry.
Okay. Which of our team, Darren, have you?
Hello. Yeah, I wrote to my donor. I didn't really know what family they may have, so my letter went to Papworth. That was screened by Papworth, then posted on to the Organ and Transplant NHS department, who then sent it on. From my point of view, I just wanted to say thank you. Didn't expect necessarily to hear back, wasn't necessarily going to be the sort of fairy tale ending, but I took a phone call not long ago to say I had a reply. Very nice letter back. I now know a lot more about the donor, and I've since written again after taking part in some of the sporting events, just to try and let them know that I'm making best use of it. And at Run Norwich, I ran with a bib, Darren and donor. I didn't know their name at that point, but yeah, I think it was a really big thing for myself personally to write. I didn't want them to just think I'd taken it for granted, but I wanted them to know that I existed and that heart hadn't been rejected, it had been used and has actually helped someone. Thank you.
I haven't yet written to my donor family. I have a draft. I'm just not sure yet what to put. I feel like I need to put the right words. There are no right words, I know. It's just, I think it's a difficult letter to write. So I'm still waiting to feel like I'm ready to do it, but I will do it at some point. Yeah.
And I think one of the other things that we have to consider, Darren, we applauded and are thrilled for Darren and his family about that anniversary coming up in the next 2 or 3 weeks. But of course, that is the anniversary of bereavement for the donor family. And we have an acute consciousness of that. That's part of our being grateful, really. Annette, do you want to add anything?
Yes. Yes, I've been transplanted now 9 years. I wrote to my donor family when I was just over a year out. I felt I needed to give them time to grieve. Unsure about how they would accept a letter from someone that was now fit and healthy when they were still going through the grieving process. I hear back from my donor family every year. I've now got photographs of them all. Photographs coming were quite a shock. That was only last year, and it took me 3 weeks to undo the letter.
Photograph of the donor?
Yes. Being that he was the same age as my children, really hit home. So, but I'm glad I've got them now. Now I can put a face to, the person that saved my life, and has given me so many opportunities since.
Perhaps the final word should be that we no longer have cardiomyopathy. It's quite a realization when you first realize that. But you do have a new condition. You have a new condition called post-transplant. And that's not straightforward, but boy, it's better than being underground.
Thanks very much, Steve.